Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. How's the volume right now? Great. So, really nice to see all of you this evening. Welcome. My name's Ruby T, and I'm the curator of museum education here at PAM. Welcome to the Fredi, Schiff, Levin lecture series, which is graciously sponsored by the Levin family. Now in its 22nd season, the lecture series honors Fredi Schiff Levin's legacy as a member of the Provincetown arts community by inviting artists, curators, authors, and scholars to speak at PAM. We are grateful to the Levin family for their continued support of this annual program. Thanks for joining us for this exciting lecture in the very exhibition that the lecture is about, which is a rare treat for us, and we're so thrilled to welcome Dr. Barbara Wolanin. Dr. Barbara A. Wolanin is an expert on Arthur B. Carl's The Philadelphia Modernist and Colorist, admired by Hans Hofmann, the subject of her dissertation. Her publications include the two major exhibition catalogs about Carl's and ones for a number of his students. She researched and wrote the curatorial essay for Group 55 and Mid-Century Abstraction in Philadelphia, one of three exhibitions about Sam Feinstein on view in Philadelphia in 2020. As curator for the Architect of the United States Capitol for 30 years, she managed the conservation of murals and sculpture and oversaw publications, research, and exhibitions, as well as archives and photography. She previously taught art history at Trinity College and James Madison University. Dr. Wolanin received her PhD in art history from the University of Wisconsin and her master's degrees from Oberlin College and Harvard University. She has served on the boards of the Women's Caucus for Art and the James Renwick Alliance for Craft. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barbara Wolanin.
Let me know if you can hear me. Is this good? Okay. I am so glad that we can be here in this room, the perfect place to have Sam Feinstein's paintings displayed, but also for you to hear about him. Very grateful to CEO Chris McCarthy, her wonderful staff for this show, and for Pat Feinstein and the Samuel L. Feinstein Trust for the support for this exhibition. Sam Feinstein is an artist that I know some of you know about, but a lot of people have never heard of, and I want to tell you about how I found out about who he was, what's so special about his paintings and his ideas about art, and why he got left out of the history of American art. His paintings belong in this gallery because he spent 12 summers in Provincetown, and he was a student of Hans Hofmann, starting in 1949. Here he's on a picture of him on the wharf and him with Hofmann, obviously, in the studio. And then he spent the summers in Dennis on the Cape the whole rest of his life. So he's very much part of the history of this place. I first saw Sam Feinstein's name, you can see on that little thing, Sam Feinstein, on the best review I ever read, I still have ever read, about Arthur B. Carl's, who was a colorist, a Philadelphia colorist and modernist. I was doing my dissertation, and Feinstein, whoever he was, grasped Carl's better than anyone. He talked about his work being like a symphony of color and elegant blossoming, the planes, the things happening, and what was going on in the paintings like this one, which is now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and also how Carl's anticipated abstract expressionism, which was just happening right then. I wondered for decades who he was, and this was in the 70s that I first read Sam Feinstein's name. I published my research, as she mentioned, in two catalogs on Carl's and also another catalog about Hofmann and Carl's and Provincetown. They actually met each other in Paris way back, and they knew Matisse and Picasso, knew about Kandinsky, and then Carl's daughter, Mercedes, got them together in 1934 in Gloucester. This is right at the time that Hofmann was starting his school. She told me that she thinks she's the one that got him to get away from just drawing in black and white and moving into color, and I think that's probably true. And Carl's and Hofmann and Feinstein were all inspired by Matisse, Cézanne, Picasso, Kandinsky, all these things that were happening. and Feinstein in his review talked about how prescient this last painting of Carl's was, with the black lines, the dripping lines, and Carl's had a stroke and stopped painting in 1941, and really was just moving into abstract expressionism. A lot of the artists knew about him, and again, he ended up 11 years in a nursing home and not ever able to paint again. So both Hofmann and Feinstein saw Carl's as really a prophet of abstract expressionism. It was not until 2005 that I met Pat Feinstein, just by chance. I went to a conference at the last minute. I could not find a hotel, and I went to lunch with a bunch of women, and I said, is there anyone that could let me stay with them tonight? I can't find a hotel. Somebody raised her hand. She took me home with her, and it turned out it was Pat Feinstein. And I found out who Feinstein was, and I got to sleep under Starry Night, would you believe? That was my introduction to him. And Pat and I became friends, and for many years, and we worked on that show together with Group 55, which unfortunately happened during COVID, so not a lot of people saw it. And Pat had done a beautiful biography of Sam Feinstein, and this is the show at the Woodmere Museum. So we really thought that where Feinstein's work belonged was right here in Provincetown, so here it is. Pat also, has all the archives, the things in the archival case, and the Samuel L. Feinstein Trust is the one that owns these paintings, most of these paintings, except for the two that belong to Pam. But I put in the catalog a lot of pictures of other paintings that are now in museums, important museums, because it's very difficult to borrow them, but I wanted people reading the catalog to know about them. I am very drawn to color. You can see I like bright colors, and in the world and in paintings. That's why I worked on Carl's and why I love Feinstein's painting. And this painting Feinstein called Starry Night is an unusual horizontal one. You can see it in person. He did it at a happy time in his life, and I love the way there's so much movement in the painting. You see these yellows, the reds seem to be moving upwards, and it's just so alive. And he started it in the 1970s and didn't finish it until he had one late show in 1986 when he gave it its name. And he said that looking at the stars gave him a sense of planetary universal things, not unlike what Van Gogh had felt when he painted his Starry Night. And a big challenge for me as an art historian, as a curator with these paintings, is a lot of them don't have titles, and he did not sign them and date them, and I'll explain why that was, but I like to have nice dates, to line everything up. So fortunately, Pat Feinstein has known him, studied with him for many years, and was his last wife, and has a better sense of anyone than when things might have been done. So that's where the dates come from, and why I didn't even want to have untitled in the show, because he did not title them untitled. They just did not get titled at all, and I'll tell you why some of them did get. And he was a real philosopher, and I think an artist with words in his teaching and the way that he wrote and spoke he spoke a lot publicly. And he said that the reason he painted was, in painting I try to get energy and spirit across through a sense of radiance. Painting is simply working with units of color to make forms emerge that express the essential spirituality of life. And the word radiance is about warmth and glow, shining, I think like light coming through stained glass window, or you think if you talk about a person who looks radiant, their face almost seems to glow with happiness. I was thinking about it also in medieval paintings, the halos around the saints, it kind of expresses that glow. So that's what he was really trying to get, that sense of light and energy in these paintings, which I think you feel here in this room. And he really believed that our human lives can transcend what the things in the physical world. He developed a way of painting, with color. And as you look at these paintings, try to imagine how he put them on the canvas. It's not easy. People did not really watch him paint. He did never get photographed painting. Imagine how he got those thick layers of color, one layer over another, some layers smooth. How would, if you were going to paint one of these, how would you even do it, and look at them very, very carefully. And he would often layer colors, juxtapose, and he believed that, he said, to a painter, hue in color, it corresponds to pitch, as in a musical note. Each hue, which is red, blue, yellow, becomes a single mix of color, array of painted light, precise in its difference from every other hue, and contributing to their massing as forms, to their projections as vibrance, to vibrance gathered into shape. And that was an idea early in the 20th century of comparing art with music, and in a way trying to create a symphony on canvas, which is something that Sam Feinstein had understood. And even when we focus on, you could take any of these canvases, but I did this with Starry Night, take a little corner, block it out of any of these paintings, and you have another beautiful little painting. Each section of the painting, in a sense, is sort of complete and interesting in itself. And when you look at the whole painting, he worked it so that your eye is moving around all parts of the canvas, and you might bright color like orange or yellow. A lot of times he put on the edge, and what made you look all over. You couldn't just look in the center, or then your eye would be caught by another color, and it would be moving all the time. He talked about wanting his canvases where you're looking up and down and all around, and that they were almost like they're breathing in and out, because it was also in space as well as on the surface of the canvas. So this is one of the rare photographs of him painting that his son Sasha took, and you can see what he was painting right there. This is late in life. Feinstein, born in 1915, painted from childhood until the end of his life in 2003. He emigrated with his family from Ukraine and Russia at age 5, and finally they ended up in Philadelphia when he was 7. And his painting of the immigrants on the right from the 1930s may reflect some of the difficult times they had getting from, one country to another, and finally landing in the United States. As a child, he drew constantly, and he excelled in art as well as academic subjects and athletics in high school. And he got a scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania, but his family was kind of dismayed that he turned it down, because he knew he wanted to be an artist. So he went to the Pennsylvania Museum School, which later grew into the University of the Arts, and which unfortunately I just heard has closed down now, which is really sad. He portrayed himself more than once as an artist in his self-portraits. And he did sketching around Philadelphia, street scenes, figures. He was very adept at sketching, painting. And one of the dramatic things that happened to him, he got to go with one of the art teachers in the summer to Canada, to the Gaspé Peninsula, this dramatic per se rock, dramatic landscape, and all of a sudden kind of let loose with watercolors and with a color very different from the much more tight academic work that he'd been doing in the art school. And I keep seeing that little watercolor comparing with this late painting right there, some of the same fun feeling of the power of nature that he felt early on, that he was then conveying in kind of an abstract way much, much later in his life. When he graduated from the museum school, in 1936, he got into juried exhibitions. He won a gold medal. He had a solo exhibition, and one reviewer noticed in that exhibition how his colors glowed. And he was very interested early on then from light and trying to get this sense of radiance. And he said later, one of my very earliest influences was Rembrandt. I responded on some very deep level to the idea of light that seemed to come out of his canvases. The sense of an inner light, sense of light trying to work through the figure, that sense of radiance is what I've always tried to keep in mind. He was always looking at historical art and the great masters and using those in his teaching as well. He was Jewish, raised Jewish, but he did not practice as an adult. But he was deeply connected with biblical subjects, including from the New Testament, as you see here. And he depicted the crucifixion a number of times over the years. But I think for him it was a universal subject, a person who'd been killed and maimed, and the feelings that brought out, that was something you could, so many people, and it's still happening, of people being killed today. He also was very interested in things like fairy tales, like this one on the left is Aladdin and the lamp, but he made them so dramatic. He really knew, he had decided to major in commercial art because he thought the way he could earn his living was advertising and commercial art, but he really was good at conveying the real impact of the story through the way that he composed them and drew. And another favorite topic was Don Quixote, but he just made them so dramatic you could get the essence of what the story was about. He was working as a graphic artist in advertising, but also began teaching at a school for boys, and I think that was the beginning of realizing how much he loved teaching. He was horrified by the outbreak of the World War II. He tried applying to be a conscientious objector, but it was not accepted. So he decided to enlist, but his goal was to do something with his art in the Army, and he was able to do that. Thankfully, he didn't get sent over into battle, but he was working, creating booklets and posters for the medical corps, and imagining the horrors of war without having to experience them directly. But again, even these works are so compelling. He also got training in filmmaking and animation, sort of new kind of arts. After the war, he taught at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the Girls' School and was working as a filmmaker. One of the really impressive things he did, he worked on a film called One World or None about the nuclear bombs and nuclear fission. And he had to figure out a way, somehow graphically, to tell the story of how atoms split and keep splitting. And the end of the film was then imagining a bomb, in New York City or something. Everybody, artists and everyone else, were terrified, and we still should be terrified by, nuclear weapons. But I think that this also really enhanced his interest in science and the whole idea that everything is alive, even if it's an inanimate object. It's made out of atoms with little things swirling around in it, as we are. Everything's alive. Everything has energy, and that was a big, impulse of his art and his painting. So. Then he was able to spend summers for 3 years in Gloucester, near here, and just loved painting by the water and the harbor. We've got 2 of the harbor paintings here or in the show, but he did many of them, and obviously had a good time doing them. He came with his wife, Barbara Crawford. He had married, actually, but right before he went into the Army, and some of them are, you can see he knew how to do perspective, how to construct the buildings, but like in the one with the boat and the lobster trap, he was really interested in the angles and the motion, and obviously getting more and more aware of modern art and cubism and things like that, and kept making things more and more dramatic and more abstract using these principles, but I almost feel like his filmmaking might have made a difference too, the idea of moving around, your camera around. And he decided what he really wanted to do was paint, and the best, most renowned teacher of painting in the country was Hans Hofmann. So he signed up for Hofmann's class in New York, and then was able to come to Provincetown in 1949, first year. And this is one of Hofmann's paintings of the time, the school that's in the kind of barn-like building behind the house where Hofmann was living, which still exists. I just got to see it the other day, and where artists came from all over the country to study with Hofmann. So this 1949, the year that he came to Provincetown, was a big year in American art. You just had a big exhibition and things about Forum 49, which I'm sorry I missed, but that year they had set up a whole show of abstract expressionist paintings and had all these people coming to talk, and critics and artists, and talking about jazz or what's going on with art, all in when Feinstein the first year, summer that he came. And that was the year also that Life magazine did a headline about Jackson Pollock. Is he the greatest living artist in the United States? Here's someone doing the drip paintings that people had made fun of, but all of a sudden he's getting touted, you know. So this is a time when people were really getting aware of this abstract expressionism. And then the artists went back to New York. They'd been hanging around at the Cedar Bar, and they started a club where they would all come and talk and have the critics. And Feinstein was part of that because he was working in New York during the week. So I like this comparison. This is it's a casein, which is a mixture of paint with milk products for the binder, and pastel on paper, showing Provincetown, done early. And then what he did in this beautiful, exciting painting that Pam has of this watercolor ink with Provincetown, where there's only little suggestions of a wharf, but it's about the light and the air and the feeling of the sunlight, not literal at all. And this is what the kind of changes that happened to him as he was studying with Hofmann. He, in 1950, he and Barbara Crawford got a house called Ribbons that's still there, although the shutters are now painted red, on Captain Jack's Wharf, and Feinstein did the stationery for the wharf. And it was right practically catty corner from Hofmann's house, where Hofmann and his wife lived, where the classes were. And so he studied with Hofmann from 49 through 52 under the GI Bill, and then still came every summer there and was good friends with Hofmann, a colleague. And he was known for being able to understand some of Hofmann's German or some of his abstract ideas and explain them better to the other artists. And he helped Hofmann write, things about his theories. A lot of the beautiful things I'd read over the years that were supposedly Hofmann said, really Feinstein wrote them down beautifully and expressing the ideas that Hofmann had. And so here they are again in that class on the easels. Feinstein said that Hofmann, unlike a lot of students, they would draw on charcoal and paper, and then Hofmann would come in, and if the student didn't seem to be getting it, he would draw on it, on the picture, or tear the picture up and put it together in different ways. And Feinstein he thought this was sort of horrible, but then he realized that was the best way Hofmann could explain what he was trying to teach the students about. He didn't think these drawings were precious. And Feinstein quoted Hofmann saying that Arthur B. Karls, who I still love, really understood color as a plastic means, as a monumental building process in which forms do not precede but develop out of color. And that was something that both Hofmann and Feinstein were working with. And at first, Feinstein was struggling with all this. It was a whole new way of making art. Then in 1950, because he'd learned filmmaking, he asked Hofmann if he could do a film about him painting. And so Hofmann agreed, and at least he got to film some of the work of him painting this window painting that's called The Window, that's now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And unfortunately, because of the lighting, they were inside, they had to do it in black and white. And the film was really supposed to explain to people what Hofmann's whole theory of art was. And Feinstein worked on it for many years and changed the narration and worked with Hofmann, and Hofmann approved what he'd done and getting the right music. And finally, it did not get finished until 1999 when it was shown at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but it is going to be shown now, and it is available. So it was pretty amazing project there. So these are some of, on the left and right, some of the drawings, of the many drawings that Feinstein saved from the Hofmann class, and they would have a model sitting on a chair as the starting point. You can see the model on the left, but I love this one on the right where Feinstein really just made it into kind of abstract, almost transparent planes. I almost think of it like glass, just the forces rather than anything literal. And these two drawings now are also at the Metropolitan Museum. And then painting, and the oil paintings again, starting with the figure, you can see a little bit of figure on the one to the right, but the idea was to make it explode, move off the canvas, show the three-dimensionality with the paint, not just try to literally depict the figure and shade it and make it look three-dimensional in the traditional ways. Then Feinstein started the idea of color. This is what Feinstein told people in an article about what motivates an abstract painter, about color. You know, the color is not a skin, how the warm colors move, the cool colors recede. This all grew out of Hofmann, really adding a third dimension to the canvas, which I think, again, you can see, especially when you can see the real things, not just photographs. And so that use of color and what Hofmann called push and pull was one of the big things that Feinstein also agreed with. Another concept was plasticity, which is a really kind of hard word for us today because we think we have plastics everywhere, even our clothes and things, but there weren't plastics then really, and plasticity means the forming power, like a plant growing or humans growing, things, and not just molding a plastic toy or something like that. But he felt that all art has had plasticity. All art has had this. Life has it, whether it's a planet, a huge planet, or a cell. This idea of things moving, growing, and changing. Again, that big motivation for his paintings. And his paintings grew in size till 4 feet high, like the one on the right, to me, shows what he had learned from Hofmann, and he kept moving on with his own painting and did beautiful ones on paper. These two are the ones in the show. Again, going back to that idea of the color like musical notes, like he had gotten from Kandinsky, particularly the one on the right here on the top there, reminds me quite a bit of the Kandinsky period that I like a lot. And the beautiful one here that's at Pam, on the wall here from the 50s, where he and some of the other artists too wanted to build up the impasto on their canvases. Sometimes they'd even mix sand from the beach or whatever, build it up so it wasn't just a flat, even thing at all. And the other one now is at the Woodmere Art Museum, but he really started getting to the sense of almost making things like they're exploding right on the canvas, which was some of his goals. 1953, he and Barbara Crawford bought a house on Chancellor Street in Philadelphia. We have a person here who was there and with them and visited it, and Pat saw it too. And Barbara Crawford actually was the head of the Jungian Center of Philadelphia. So they had all these people, architects and musicians and people gathering there all the time. And at the same time, Feinstein was hired to review shows in Philadelphia, New York, and the Cape for Art Digest. So, and that was the one that I had seen of the Carl's paintings. And he and Barbara Crawford worked together, and they put out invitations to artists in Philadelphia who were working with abstract art to meet and start a group. They wanted to show their work, but also educate people to appreciate abstract art. I think even today, I know a lot of people that are educated people that really do not know how to look at an abstract painting or don't get anything from it. They just, if you don't have something, like a duck or a face or something in it, they have a really hard time appreciating it. And Feinstein knew that. This was a photograph that they used in the newspaper. He was the spokesman for this group that they formed, that they decided to call Group 55 because they had first met in 1955. And Feinstein did this first poster. He did all the graphics for them. And he said it was an invited membership of artists interested in discussing contemporary creative problems among themselves and with the public. And when he wrote the names of all the artists on that big burst, and when I looked at those, some of them were students of Arthur Carl, some were students of Hofmann, including Feinstein, some were students of Feinstein, and other ones were people that Feinstein had reviewed, that he'd gotten to know. And so they had this group that then worked together and decided, and what interested me when I finally got the whole list put together, who was in this group, almost half of them were women. That was pretty unusual for 1955. And they were showing the women's work, discussing it. Hofmann's later students, many of his really devoted students were women all along. So that was something, to me, I'm very interested in women artists, so that was special. They had their first exhibition and first forum in January 1956, pretty fast after they'd first met. Here's Feinstein's painting, one of the shows, and where they had it is in a gallery that was run by a man named Hank Dubin. And you can see it was just in a little townhouse. And they'd advertised it, all the people were really excited about it. And that night, people were lined up down the street. They couldn't fit in this little space. So after that, they got space, they reserved space in the big public library auditorium so they could do it there. But so the people were really excited about this. It was very important for Philadelphia. But it wasn't just artists talking about their art, that was part of it, but they had people, friends of Feinstein, the Feinsteins like Louis Kahn, the architect, well-known Philadelphia architect, composers like George Rochberg talking, those were in the first forum. So Feinstein had this idea that all these things were happening in the world at the same time. It wasn't just painters that were doing something so different with abstract expressionism, but in music, in psychology, in science, and he would bring all these people together to talk about it. He started doing more with the Dubin Gallery, and in 1957 organized a show of, he called it Abstract Expressionist Impressionist Paintings. They were all borrowed from New York galleries. He had the connections with the galleries and showed it in Philadelphia, including this one that's right below Hans Hofmann was included in it as well. But what happened is some of the artists in this group got like all of these forums and all this stuff and trying to sell tickets for them and all these things. That was a lot of work. And they really they kind of wanted to exhibit their work, and they kind of wanted to just have fun and socialize, have parties, not have it so serious. And so a bunch of them pulled out and started it's really an offshoot group called Philadelphia Abstract Artists in 1957. And there were a few people that stayed in both groups, but this was a lot of the major people. They were then showing through 1962 under that name. A lot of those artists kept showing together. They were teachers and things themselves. But really, it was all an outgrowth of what Sam Feinstein was doing. He didn't give up. In 1958, he had 4 forums, very elaborate forums, with all these different speakers, including a modern dancer, which is wonderful. And the Woodmere catalog has a really good essay on that, on his the connection with the modern dance. But then also it seemed like here he was. He's a leader. He's a spokesman. He had he was exhibiting in New York. He had solo exhibitions in Philadelphia and Provincetown in 1958. He got a painting purchased by the Chrysler Museum that was in Provincetown. He was one of the jurors, along with Hofmann, for the Provincetown Art Association annual exhibit. I mean, he really was sort of the top of the field. And it was interesting, in the 2 solo exhibitions, the people that reviewed them sort of said, well, Feinstein is so articulate, we'll let him explain what he's doing. They didn't even try. But what he talked about was how these free paintings, like the one down there, what he was trying to do was capture the feeling of being in Provincetown. He said the coolness, the hotness, wetness, sun, mist, hurricane, the water, rocks, everything people experience here, but not, again, depicting them literally, the animating pulse of them. And then he also said that sometimes he took these works on paper and then used them as an inspiration for one of his oil paintings, like I think was maybe the case with this beautiful one that's now at the Woodmere Art Museum, where I get a sense of things growing and sunlight and air in that, and without anything literally depicted. And then one painting that he showed in Philadelphia was called pietà. The pietà is an Italian word that means pity or piety. It seems like you think of Renaissance paintings or Michelangelo, but again, for Feinstein, that was a mother grieving over her dead child. I mean, that's, again, a universal thing, deep, intense, horrible thing, that one of the worst things that can happen to someone. And he actually did 3 different paintings. The one that we have here he called Pietà 1, and then two other versions that maybe refer, the center one, sometimes I think maybe there's a cross in the middle of it, but it's not really literal, or it's more the feelings, the idea of the death that then in resurrection kind of is part of one thing. This is one of his largest oils that he did here in the show, and again, where imagine trying to paint that huge canvas. He's getting really big, way more than the 4 feet, really high, and you stand up close to them, you almost become part of them. You look at all the details, there's so much happening. Paint dripping, one color on top of the other. He wasn't really painting with a brush very much. It was more palette knife, or rubbing things with a rag, or letting things drip, or taking the tube of paint, skirting a line out like that. So some of you are painters. You may have done things like that yourselves. So here's some of the other paintings from the 50s while he was still painting in oil. One here in the show, which is a really, really, really strong one, I think. And no 2 of the paintings you can see are alike. Each one, he was creating something new, kind of a new world with that painting. So, but here he is, kind of at the height of things in 1958, but the whole art world was changing. Okay, this is the kind of thing that was being exhibited at the same time. Robert Rauschenberg could take his literal bed, put paint on it, exhibit it. We have, Lichtenstein with comic books, Oldenburg, Andy Warhol, soup cans as art. I mean, that was totally different than what Feinstein was doing. Straight lines, plain colors. I mean, these artists were all very, intense on what they were doing, but very different. And Feinstein knew that leading critic, Clement Greenberg, who all of a sudden started espousing color field and hard edge painting. And he actually told Feinstein, well, you should kind of get with it. This gestural stuff, his old hat, you should move into something new. It'd be much galleries would like that much better. Well, he did not like that at all, and decided that this is what he didn't think art was about. And he stopped exhibiting, and he stopped selling his work after 1959. So in 1960, he did not exhibit or sell. He decided he could teach, and he could make enough money and not live frugally and teach, which he loved. And he taught on the Cape, he taught in New York, he taught in Philadelphia every week, Princeton. Later he had workshops in Toronto, Canada, and he would spend a lot of time and energy teaching and thinking about it, and then painting on his own. And he actually said, I used to exhibit a good deal. I discovered in writing about art, he was behind the scenes, he saw what was happening with the galleries, the impact on the artists. When your art starts selling for a lot of money, it kind of like changes the way you feel about what you're doing as a painter. And he said, the whole art market thing, he said, I just felt that was irrelevant. It was the important thing was to actually do the painting the way that some people feel they want to pray. So it was always a spiritual thing for him. And I personally have always believed that the dollar signs attached to a painting that's been auctioned or something really doesn't have very much to do with its real art value. It's like selling paintings like stocks. That's not what art is really about, but it's happening now more and more. And Irving Sandler, who had interviewed him and who had written the first history of abstract expressionism, did not include Feinstein in his book or in his later revised book. And I pulled out all the books that I have on abstract expressionism, and Feinstein's name is not even in the index. He really got written out of the story because of stopping selling or showing his work. People weren't seeing it anymore. And Hofmann even asked him, Hofmann stopped his schools in 1958, that same year, and asked, Sam was one of the people, he said, well, would you like to take over the Hans Hofmann school? And nobody actually did, and Sam Feinstein wanted to teach his own way. He didn't want to take over the school. So he started his own studio, Sam Feinstein, where he taught the way he wanted to, and some of these big classes, that is the big workshop, where he wanted to really teach. One of his big ideas was that every human being can be creative. Every person can paint. Every person can make art. I believe that myself. I mean, I taught art to children for a while. I do believe that's true. And every person is born to create. And he was known for having these huge still lifes in his classrooms, which people were almost appalled by when they walked in. Some of you may know that, where they were basically junk, all piled up, all kinds of things. But he did it deliberately, ranging things to shapes and colors to give something for the students to start on. I don't know how I would have done trying to do anything like that, but this is part of that idea of trying to make people aware of plasticity, that all-pervading eternal drive through creation. And then sort of pessimistically, if man should blow up all forms as we know them, it'll keep continuing. And he also talked about the difference between a contained form, which is like a comic book. You draw an outline around something and you color in. That's not what he was doing. He was trying to make the form through the color, this projected form, the inner feeling of it. And he would read all kinds of books to the students and talk about all kinds of different things and make them, it wasn't just about painting, but really about life. So his life changed another way dramatically around that time. 1958, his marriage with Barbara Crawford was dissolving, and he met another young artist, Anita Askold, and they ended up getting married and had a son, Sasha, in 1963. And you can see at the bottom, Hofmann met them, and they stayed friends to the end of Hofmann's life. And this was a very happy period in his life, I think. And he also had changed his medium from using oils to acrylics, which are the new, plastic-based paints. And part of the reason for that is he loved layering things, layering one color over another. Well, if anybody's worked with oil, you have to let that underlayer dry. If you put something on top of it, it's all going to crack or it won't work, or maybe some of the paintings here crack because of that big one. But with acrylics, he could do what he wanted to do, put a white, and then it dried quickly, and then yellow, and then if he didn't like it, he could change it and build it up thickly, and it really worked well for him. And he obviously used good quality paints with these brilliant colors. And some of the students, there's a film about Feinstein that you'll see here in July, but the students would talk about how he'd look at someone's painting and he could take his finger, put some paint on it, and just put one dot on their painting, and it totally changed it. All of these abstract paintings, every decision you make, every bit of color and where it is going to change the whole thing. It's really amazing. This is one of my favorites here, Ascension. This is again in acrylic in the probably 1970s, and again trying to get the sense of energy. You almost feel like fire or something hot, rising up. And a lot of his paintings have this real sense of movement. A lot of times moving upward, which I think, to me, expresses life and kind of optimism. Other ones that two down here, like the opposing elements, you look at that, almost like you can see something almost blowing up. But he would do the rough, heavy and pastel areas, and then quiet, smooth areas to balance them. Look at those carefully. This nightscape over here, still using those heavy textures, but again balancing them with smoother areas. This painting is one that is not in the show, but what he would do is he would just paint on the huge pieces of canvas, not have them stretched before he was painting. If you look at a couple of these big ones around the edges, you can see that. They were stretched afterwards. And he would tell his students to start out the class by painting wild ones, which was take your paper and just cover it with anything and get started painting. And this one, to me, seemed like one that he really covered almost all of this huge canvas. And maybe he liked it the way it was and decided to stop, or he decided to put it aside and see what he wanted to do with it. He liked to have them around for years and get some other ideas about them. They were living things for him. And that's why he didn't date them, he didn't sign them. In a sense, they weren't finished, right? And he was, two of his palette knives are in the case. He plied the paint with palette knives, very, got them thick, used the tip of the palette knife, a very particular way of painting. And sadly, his young wife died way too early of cancer in 1980, and so he went through a period of obviously grieving. But some of the paintings he did through that, like this one of Resurrection and The Cry, were a whole new sort of era of painting for him, where it was broad swaths of color, strong feeling to them. And he said that, and that when the show is open, you can actually hear him talking on the video there. There's a little bit of video where you hear him talking about that. And he talked about the cry. He didn't literally paint a person crying. He tried to make the whole painting crying, like a huge mouth screaming. He wanted the whole painting screaming, not something literal. He had been teaching with his longtime student, Pat Feinstein, and they ended up getting married in 1985, which is really lucky for Sam that he's had somebody taking care of his work all this time. And Pat, I think, really encouraged him to, and some of his friends encouraged him to actually finally show some of his work. And here's this one wonderful document we have in Painting the Cry. Should have done that. And here he is, as the show at the Scargo Pottery, which is still there, was being installed. He's still working on the paintings, but it gave him an excuse really to finally get some of them titles and to talk about them, that film. And luckily, Paul Fitzgerald supported a film that is crucial for his really recording his philosophy in a real way. And one of the things that he said is that, these are optical structures to touch the human spirit, to get energy and spirit through a sense of radiance, and that all life is radiant, even the darkest hole. He had been through dark times in his life. And I won't read this whole quote on this one, but he said, we don't paint flowers, we paint flowering, the whole thing. And he did do some works on paper. At the end of his life, he did have heart surgery and things like that. The doctors didn't want him doing these great, huge canvases. But he kept painting. He kept painting the whole rest of his life. He also wanted to try to write down his ideas about teaching and creativity. And he kept working on different drafts of books. And one of them was called Be Glad You Can't Draw. Don't draw, And he finally ended up putting a copyright on the last version, a known version in 1989, and he called it Art for Life's Sake, okay? And one of the things he talked about was, this really resounds to me, that the media, now look at the media then in 1989, and now it's even much more of a thing, right? What we have in terms of media. It's empty calories, undernourished, we confuse novel invention with creativity. So like something like Jeff Koons, balloon dog or something is not what Feinstein's idea of art was at all. We have slipped into numb tolerance of eccentricity and superficiality. Art publicized not as spiritual sustenance, but as mere entertainment. With today's measure of artistic success being its monetary return, art has become essentially a commodity. There's a lot of truth to that. I think it's worse now than it's probably ever been. So he kept painting these amazing, huge canvases. As I said, this is one that he had, again, painted on flat canvases, and he was able to store them that way, just flat, pile them, and stack them or put them on board so they, didn't take up so much space. This one here in the center of the show, he called it two things: crucifixion, sometimes requiem in 1990s, and he felt that creating art comes out of the purest aspect of yourself. And he wasn't afraid to say that the word religion means reconnection, and the most religious thing you could do is paint. So again, these wonderful late works with all kinds of variety of textures, colors, things happening with them. And I'm so glad they're here. This room, the Hans Hofmann Gallery, of all places, the perfect place for them, a beautiful space for these great paintings. And glad to let you know a little bit about Sam Feinstein and sense of radiance. I think I'm supposed to answer questions if you have any. Anybody has any?
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was wonderful. Does anyone have a question? I can pass you the mic. No? Oh.
I tried. In the catalog too, don't miss the catalog, please, yeah.
Do you have a question?
I don't have a question, I have an observation, if you don't mind.
No, hold the microphone, yeah.
My observation is that Sam emphasized spirituality. Hofmann was known for push and pull. Few people realized that Hofmann also was after spirituality. So Sam follows in Hoffman's footsteps in that way.
Good, that's a good point, yeah, thank you.
Also, I'd like to say this is a very powerful show. I want to spend more time with it.
Good. It's up all summer, which is great, yep.
Yeah, please don't miss the catalog. There's a really incredible catalog with essays by Barbara and by Pat, and it's really fabulous. We have it in the bookstore. I have a question.
Sure, please.
You've been looking at Sam Feinstein for so long now, and you started before your friendship with Pat.
Well, I didn't know his paintings. I just knew his name. See,
You just knew his name.
I had no idea who he was before.
So that was the moment
so
of discovery.
I saw his paintings in 2005, and I think, you know, it's not easy to write about fully abstract paintings. I painted a little bit myself. I think painting abstractly is really difficult. I mean, it's much easier to look at something and paint it than try to create something totally fresh, you know, just with color. And not easy to talk about either. I mean, and it's something that everybody looking at them feels them, notice them. As I said, really look and try to figure out how did he make them go close, step back, and look at all the angles. And I feel like all of these paintings you could keep looking at and looking at, you would never get tired of. And one thing I said, I think in the catalog, that some artists like Mark Rothko, who was interested in spirituality, he wanted you to sit and like meditate quietly, you know, in front of his, which is what you want to do. Feinstein's paintings, you want to jump around, you want to dance, you want to move. You can't be still. They're not still at all. They're very different. They have so much energy.
Great,
Okay.
thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay.
So, as an art historian, you said you're very, very much concerned with the signatures of the paintings and the dates of the paintings when they were done. Have you made some sort of peace with all of this for yourself at this point?
Oh, well, I had no choice if I wanted to write about the show. I was, you know, trying to pin Pat down, and she's like, you know, he might have, like the Starry Night, he probably mostly painted in the 70s, but then went back and touched up later. So, you know, maybe he didn't paint it nonstop over decades, but he would come back to things when he wanted to. And that's partly why he wanted to keep them around him.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks,
being here.
everybody.
Yeah, well, because we're speaking about the Hofmann film in particular, I am going to show it here on the 7th of August, Wednesday night, 6 o'clock in a program. It really was one of the works of art he was committed to throughout his life, the editing of it, the care of it, and it certainly emphasizes the character of Hofmann's teaching and the spiritual emphasis that Hofmann had. So I did want to have that available for everyone to see again. Also on the 24th of July, the last 5 years I've been fortunate to work with a filmmaker who saw his quote, actually saw a quote of Sam's on the door of my studio, and it said, "Creativity is spirituality looking for a form." And that quote inspired her to really invest the last few years of her life in creating a documentary, which we thought might be just a very short one, 10, 12 minutes. It's a 40-minute documentary. And there are several of his students who explain his teaching. There are his paintings and a little bit of his life as well. But that complements, this exhibit. So July 24th is that one, 6 o'clock, and it's on the website. It's on Pam's website, so you can know about that. But I'm delighted that those works will also show his work as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.